A major lapse of security forces Parliament to review its standards urgently. Prime Minister's Questions is suspended after Tony Blair is pelted with bags of powder. We'll be reporting on the campaigners who staged the protest and on the implications for public access to Parliament. Also tonight, in Iraq, US forces are accused of killing 40 people at a wedding party. Firefighters prepare for a strike ballot and the latest pay dispute isn't settled. And Sebco takes the baton in the race to bring the Olympics to London.
And on Look North tonight, health officials work to try to control a major outbreak of mumps in North Yorkshire. And Huddersfield are going to Cardiff for the Division 3 playoff final. We'll have a report on the big game that's got them through.
Good evening. The Palace of Westminster has suffered its biggest breach of security for several years. Prime Minister's Questions in the House of Commons had to be suspended when Tony Blair was hit by bags of powder thrown from the visitors' gallery. The powder turned out to be harmless, but as MPs pointed out, it could have been very different. The protest was the latest by a group campaigning for equal parenting rights for fathers after separation. There'll now be tougher rules on public access to Parliament. Our chief political correspondent, Mark Mardell, was in the Commons when the protest happened.
I wonder why.
He was in full flow when a noise from the public gallery turned every head. Una King, in purple, just behind the Chancellor, was closer than most.
The second thing that was thrown hit the Prime Minister quite clearly on the back. He was about a metre in front of me, and I was shocked that he had been hit.
In all, protesters threw 3 condoms filled with flour dyed purple, but MPs couldn't know what was showering the chamber.
I was like a bat out of hell. I was under the gallery, saw it come down and immediately rushed out of naked self-interest, but also to alert the police in the members' lobby.
The Prime Minister's instinct was to carry on. He thought the powder was harmless. Others nearby felt their hearts thumping.
I copped a fair amount of it. I got pretty much a good coating of it, so it was quite a scary moment.
Order! The House is now suspended.
MPs brushed themselves down. The Prime Minister slowly made his way to the exit, apparently lost in thought. John Prescott carefully covered up 3 purple splodges of powder with pieces of paper. I was in the press gallery, which is directly opposite the public gallery where the attack came from. And as soon as the session was suspended, the ushers began to shout, get out quickly. There wasn't exactly panic, but people did begin to worry as you could taste the powder in the air. All right, it was only flour, but the police weren't certain. They hurried to the entrance of the chamber as MPs left. And what if it had been some deadly poison? Should we all have been allowed to drift off to wherever we wanted to go? The Conservative Chief Whip loudly harried people out of the Commons. But was he right?
I accept that if it was biological contamination, I made a fatal mistake. We should all have stayed there and been contaminated and not spread it further. But since the Speaker left the chair and the chamber was emptying, I thought I should get all my people out and everyone else out quickly.
The stunt was carried out by a group called Fathers for Justice. Ron Davis is one of 2 men who've been arrested. They weren't behind the new bulletproof screen because they got their tickets from a member of the Lords who'd raffled them and seemed choked with embarrassment.
I have also seen the Speaker of the House of Commons and apologised to him unreservedly and through him to all the members of the Commons.
Later, Mr. Blair was in shirt-sleeves order, but only because of the weather. The jacket brushed up fine, and he made light of it all.
Dry cleaning bill,
Just a cleaning bill? Probably a profound impact on the way MPs do their business as well. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, today's protest has already led to a temporary ban on allowing the guests of peers into the galleries of the House of Commons. Some MPs want guests to face much more stringent checks in future. But others regret that this lapse might place further distance between the public and politicians at a time when the parties are trying to engage disaffected voters.
Since September the 11th, Parliament has added layers of protection. High metal fences topped by CCTV cameras, concrete barriers to stop suicide bombers, police with automatic weapons at the entrances to both houses. But today the threat came not from the outside, but from within, from an invited guest. The protesters came through here, St. Stephen's entrance. Just beyond the door is what's found at most airports, a bag scanner and a metal detector. The men were carrying condoms full of powder, and that could not be detected by a machine.
We've got armed police with Sten guns, we've got concrete blocks, we've got a helicopter now going overhead. We could certainly resist an attack by tanks, but someone can walk into the public gallery with a bag of flour or whatever it was. Why weren't they searched?
The two men walked to the central lobby, and from there were led to the visitors' gallery in the Commons. In the chamber, Tony Blair was at the dispatch box. The men sat in an area reserved for parliamentary guests. Because they were supposed to have been vouched for by a Labour peer, they were sitting outside a glass security screen erected just a few weeks ago at a cost of £600,000. It had been recommended by the head of MI5 and was designed to prevent attacks like today's. The tickets had been issued by a member of the House of Lords. They are supposed to certify that guests are known to them, but these tickets were auctioned for charity, a clear breach of parliamentary rules.
There are clearly going to have to be other restrictions which will make life more difficult for MPs, their guests and those of peers from the House of Lords in terms of access to the open area of the House of Commons. That's very, very regrettable.
Already the rights of peers to sponsor guests in the Commons have been suspended, and some MPs want a full review of Commons security.
Simply demonstrates that we do not take security sufficiently seriously in this country. And that's not just a matter for members of Parliament, it's actually a matter for the public at large.
Each day, hundreds of people visit Parliament to see their MPs, to lobby, or just out of curiosity. Last year, 130,000 people visited the public gallery in the House of Commons. The issue raised again by today's incident is this: how do you maintain that access whilst keeping Parliament secure? It could have been far worse today. The men could have spread anthrax spores. As one MP said, our Prime Minister's life was put in danger. This must never happen again. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
Let's talk to Mark Mardell in the central lobby at Westminster. Mark, do you think that this protest today could actually lead to very significant changes in the way things are run there?
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to lead to more searches and more people, probably all of us, ending up behind those screens. But I think more than that, it underlined that this place is still run by sort of rather quaint 18th century rules. Consider the Prime Minister wasn't bundled to safety by security men. He ambled out like everybody else. We were told that there were procedures in place, but not one member of the Cabinet or MP that I've spoken to knows what they are. And think about this. Peter Hain, the leader of the House, last time this was debated, said that if there was a chemical attack, all the doors would be locked, people would be stripped and then decontaminated. Hope they switch the cameras off before they do that, incidentally. But there was no sign of that. And do you really think if the powder was white rather than purple, it would have happened? I don't think so.
It is, let's face it, a very small percentage of British voters who actually visit Parliament. So do you think the fears about limiting public access have been overstated today?
It's certainly what a lot of MPs I speak to say. What they say is that most people get their politics, see what's going on here through television, and if you look up at the gallery most days, most of the people in there are American tourists. So they're very sanguine about this, but it may just, perhaps symbolically more than anything else, be the wrong time to be putting another barrier between the ruled and the people they rule.
Mark at Westminster, thank you very much. In Iraq, American military officials are urgently investigating reports that one of their helicopters opened fire on a wedding party, killing as many as 40 people. The incident is said to have occurred in a remote village near the Syrian border. Tonight, officials at the Pentagon said coalition forces had come under attack in the region. They'd returned fire and killed a number of individuals. Matt Fry has the latest details from Washington.
At the side of a road in the desert of western Iraq, they're frantically digging graves, at least 20 of them. Less than 24 hours ago, the bodies, now wrapped in the blankets, were men and women at a wedding reception, and children. Then this happened, according to an eyewitness. We were at the wedding, and a plane came and hit the party, he told reporters. It was 3 in the morning, they killed the whole family and blew up lots of houses. The Pentagon has said it's investigating. These images are a horrible echo of what happened in Afghanistan 2 years ago, when almost 50 people were killed at a wedding party. Then the American pilots mistook celebratory gunfire for an attack. Another tragedy, but here the timing is far worse. In Baghdad today, all eyes were on this convention center. the venue for the first court-martial of one of the American guards charged in the prison abuse scandal. Today, these pictures have become icons of shame, and this is the man who took many of them. Specialist Jeremy Sivitz, a reservist from Pennsylvania. He pleaded guilty to 4 counts of abuse, wept as he apologized to the Iraqi people, and then received a maximum sentence of 1 year in jail and a dishonorable discharge. But how far up the ladder does this scandal go? It's a question that simply won't go away. Today, the top generals fighting America's troubled war weren't in Iraq, but on Capitol Hill, summoned by the Senate to answer awkward questions.
Explain how the abuse could have happened at this level with this much devastation to our country and no one know about it before January.
Well, I think there are failures in people doing their duty. There are failures in systems, and we should have known and we should have uncovered it and taken action before it got to the point that it got to.
Another admission, but it won't end the questions, nor, given today's other events, the impression that America is losing its way in Iraq. Matt Fry, BBC News, Washington.
And we can talk to Matt right now. Matt, what's the Pentagon saying tonight about this?
Well, Hugh, it's a slightly confusing picture. They're saying that they did not target a wedding party, but they are saying that there was a firefight with what they call insurgents and foreign fighters in just about the same location that the eyewitnesses described, and also at about the same time. So obviously something did happen. The Pentagon is basically saying that they've had nothing to do with the deaths at a wedding party and they're going to continue the investigation. But I'm afraid these questions are going to be with us for some time. And remember, when this thing, a similar thing happened in Afghanistan 2 years ago, it was the same sort of story. They said, first of all, there was no firefight involving a wedding party, but then later on they had to admit that there was something like this going on.
You said in your report the timing could hardly be worse. What kind of impact could this have on public opinion there if these reports are proved to be accurate?
Well, it would be devastating, and even if they're not accurate, it's hard to think that ordinary Iraqis will not believe the initial reports. I think the overall impression is pretty miserable, to be honest. I mean, let's face it, look at some of the questions that have been asked by senior American officials in Washington in the last week. Donald Rumsfeld admitted that there is a risk of civil war in Iraq once the Americans leave. Yesterday, his deputy said that he didn't know how many troops would be needed. And of course, we've only got 40 days left for the handover to sovereignty, and we have no idea who's actually going to run the country after that day. It's not a good picture.
Matt in Washington, thank you. Firefighters in Greater Manchester have again been sent home this evening for refusing to operate a new rescue vehicle. The dispute has led to unofficial action by other crews in England. The industry is still trying to recover after last year's pay dispute. And today it was confirmed that ballots would be held for nationwide strikes if the latest pay dispute wasn't settled.
Heading for a new confrontation. Blue Watch at Salford sent home tonight as firefighters and their employers reopened their bitter dispute. This was the Flashpoint, an emergency vehicle for handling terrorist incidents. Firefighters are refusing to use it until their pay deal is finally settled.
Everyone here wants to be crewing those fire engines and protecting the community of Salford and Greater Manchester. And it seems ridiculous that this can't be resolved over a piece of equipment.
And from Greater Manchester, unofficial action spread across much of the country. In Leicester, they were still checking their gear, but refusing to take part in anti-terrorist training scheduled for today. In Cornwall, as in many other brigades, they were only prepared to answer 999 calls. The union sent a top official to Manchester for peace talks, but ended up threatening strike ballots both here and across the country.
If the employers don't reach an agreement with us, then we will go back to our conference on the 15th of June and we will recommend a ballot for industrial action.
Here's how last year's pay deal has unravelled. The firefighters say they haven't had all the extra pay they were promised, with the final 3.5% held back. But the employers say modernisation isn't complete. They want more work done overnight, ending so-called stand-down time when firefighters sleep if there are no emergency calls. The firefighters believe they're being blackmailed into unwelcome change. But tonight, the leader of the employers' team insisted the union could still put the deal back on track.
All they need to do is to come back, sit down with us, and then we can get this matter settled. And then the firefighters can have their 3.5% pay rise.
There's no doubting the huge anger of firefighters, but there's still time to avert an official walkout. The employers meet tomorrow knowing the union's given them 4 weeks to reach an agreement or face a ballot on industrial action. Rory Kaplan-Jones, BBC News.
Well, for the latest, we can talk to our correspondent Judith Moritz, who's in Salford. Judith, what are they saying there about this local dispute this evening?
Well, this evening here, like any other evening, you might expect to have seen a couple of fire engines here ready to go on the tarmac, but instead they're behind locked doors. The station is closed. Now, as you saw there in Rory's report, the evening shift turned up here expecting to work at 6 o'clock, but they were asked to sign a piece of paper which requested them to show that they would carry out all of their full duties. They refused to do that and they were sent home without pay, leaving this station without cover. Now, Greater Manchester Fire Service have said tonight that won't put lives at risk. They say if a fire happens in this area overnight, they'll simply bring in crews from elsewhere.
Well, to what extent, Judith, is the mood there in Salford reflected elsewhere?
Well, the mood here in Salford, certainly amongst the firefighters, has been one of defiance and anger that it's come to this again, and it is beginning to spread. At least within Manchester, we hear tonight from the Fire Brigades Union that there's been sporadic wildcat action at other stations as well. Now, they haven't been forced to close. Instead, it's been a case of them refusing to carry out emergency action. And this is a situation which is changing on a shift-by-shift basis. The morning shift tomorrow is due to turn up here at 9 o'clock. And at this stage, we still don't know whether they'll be sent out to work.
All right, Judith, thank you very much. Israel has been heavily condemned by the international community for its continuing raids in Gaza. At least 9 people were killed today when Israeli tanks and troops opened fire on Palestinian demonstrators in Rafah. Many more were injured. Israel has expressed regret for the deaths of any innocent civilians, as James Reynolds reports from Gaza on one of its bloodiest days.
Heading off towards the front line, to a neighbourhood cut off by the Israeli army. Amid the children, the army believes they're a gunman. Then a blast, causing injury and panic. Most try to hide or escape. Then a second explosion, more panic. On these, the most dangerous streets of the conflict. The injured are taken to Rafah's only overcrowded hospital. Those here blame Israel for firing directly at the crowd, killing children, as does the Palestinian leader from Ramallah. These are war crimes, Yasser Arafat says. This is genocide.
هذه جرائم حرب genocide بالضبط.
The Israeli army is in a tough position. It's been here in Rafah for 2 days, searching for tunnels used for weapon smuggling. What happened this afternoon, it says, is regretful.
Tank shells were fired towards an empty building, not towards the crowd, in order to deter the Palestinians from approaching. As a result of this fire, it seems that the Palestinian civilians were injured and killed. We express our deepest sorrow for the incident.
At dusk, the scene of the shooting is quiet. By the side of the road, we meet 15-year-old Mahmoud Zouda, injured in the demonstration. We got to here and the army fired, he says. We tried to get away, and then a helicopter fired. And among those here, there is a sense of anger and fear. There's also a sense of helplessness, because no one knows exactly what anyone can do against a much more powerful army. Those stuck here now wait and hope for an Israeli withdrawal from this, the desolate end of the Gaza Strip. James Reynolds, BBC News, Rafah.
India has a new Prime Minister-elect. The Congress Party this afternoon abandoned attempts to persuade its leader, Sonia Gandhi, to take the job and accepted her nominee instead. Manmohan Singh, a former finance minister, will be India's first Sikh Prime Minister. The country's president has invited him to form the next government. Another British civilian has been killed working in Iraq, according to the Foreign Office. Andrew Harris from Aberdare in South Wales was employed as a security guard. He was shot in a roadside ambush near the northern city of Mosul. At least 30 Western civilians, most of them Americans, have been killed in Iraq since March. But despite the dangers, growing numbers are turning up for work there, as John Lyne now reports from Washington.
It's a job that's as lucrative as it is dangerous. These are some of the new private army of security guards training for work in Iraq, work for which the military no longer has the manpower. Craig Redinger spent the last year in northern Iraq guarding a construction project. The former Marine has just returned home to San Francisco. He says the risks are worth it.
The rewards are high, and they're not just monetary rewards. You have somebody's life in your hands in the most highest threat environment. And that's very important. That means a lot to me. It means I'm doing something that's worth my life.
In Iraq today, there are up to 20,000 of the guys with the guns and the shades. Amazingly, some provide the security for the US envoy Paul Bremer. Another company even supplied interrogators at the notorious Abu Ghraib prison. We spoke to the head of one of the oldest established security firms, the Steel Foundation. He's worried this massive growth industry is out of control.
I'm very concerned about the quality of individuals that security companies are hiring today because they lack the experience and the knowledge of how to carry out projects in the type of environment that Iraq is.
So what sort of danger do companies like that pose to Iraq itself?
The wrong private security contractor in Iraq today could create a crisis that could affect the entire national security situation.
The problem is that unlike the military, private contractors aren't in any chain of command, in any line of responsibility. In fact, in Iraq, they're not even under any legal jurisdiction. That means if they do anything wrong, there's almost no law under which they can be charged. Many thousands more Americans are queuing for regular jobs on building sites and army camps across Iraq, looking for the sort of money that's just not around back home. Art Lindemann hoped a year driving trucks for the contractors Halliburton in Iraq would pay for a comfortable retirement until a sniper's bullet ended the dream.
He said, "It's only 1 year, Linda. You know, we can do it." And then we would basically be set for life and do the things we wanted to do. And now we can't.
It's a story being heard in more and more American homes as the line between soldiers and civilians in Iraq becomes increasingly blurred. John Lyne, BBC News, Washington.
The sister of the British suicide bomber Omar Sharif has begun giving evidence at her Old Bailey trial. Parveen Sharif told the court she had no idea what her brother's intentions were. He took part in an attack on a bar in Tel Aviv that killed 3 people and injured a further 65. She denies a charge of inciting her brother to commit an act of terrorism. Barely 24 hours after she steered London to a place on the Olympic shortlist for 2012, Barbara Cassani, the woman in charge of the bid, has resigned. She'll be replaced by the former Olympic gold medalist Sebastian Coe, but she will serve as his deputy. Robert Nesbitt reports.
Last night, Barbara Cassani surrendered to the embrace of the British sporting community at a celebration party. This morning, she shocked them out of their hangovers.
Shuffle that way.
By doing just that.
I felt that the move was right to shift slightly, not to disappear, not to do anything to lessen my commitment, but...
After what she described as months of deliberation, the American businesswoman decided to hand the baton to Lord Coe.
The most important thing in any bid is to continually reflect on your own progress. And the one thing that Barbara has always been very good at, given her management background, is monitoring and evaluation, sometimes brutal evaluation.
I'm not as skilled and as well known in the international sporting world. I'm getting to know it and I'm enjoying it very much. But what we need is someone who is already well known, someone who's already active and a leader, and that's what we have in Seb Coe.
Never totally comfortable in the media's eye, from the outset there was criticism an American was waving the flag for Britain.
Hi Penny, how are you?
But Cassani did approach the job with evangelical zeal. She promises to do the same in her new role, fleshing out London's bid. The man behind the unsuccessful attempt to bring the 2000 Games to Manchester says she's made the right decision.
I don't believe it's necessarily helpful to Britain to have an American leading the bid. I mean, we've got problems within the international community, both because of our imperial past, but also because of the war in Iraq.
So 24 hours after the celebration, London 2012 has already reshuffled its team. It now has 14 months to convince the Olympic voters that this isn't symptomatic of trouble at the top, but rather the selfless act of London's chief cheerleader. Robert Nisbet, BBC News, The London Eye.
Main news tonight. There's been a major lapse of security at the House of Commons. Prime Minister's questions were suspended after Tony Blair was pelted with bags of powder. In Iraq, American forces have been accused of killing 40 people at a wedding party. Israel has been heavily condemned for the latest raid in Gaza, which killed at least 9 people and injured many others. And in the past few minutes, we've had this news in. The US Secretary of State Colin Powell has issued a very harsh rebuke tonight to the Israelis, and he said, and I quote, "The activities of the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza in recent days have caused a problem, and I think made it more difficult to move forward and get back into the peace process." The words of Colin Powell just a few minutes ago. Newsnight's getting underway over on BBC Two, but from all of us here on the 10 o'clock team, good night.
Good evening. Well, for the second time this week, London has recorded its warmest day of the year so far, reaching the dizzy heights of 25 degrees. But we can say goodbye to those sorts of values for a while, because behind this weather front, much cooler air has arrived. Just 15 degrees across the heart of Scotland through this afternoon. And that front will continue to edge southwards overnight tonight, bringing some patchy rain with it. A bit of mist and murk to the south, clearer skies to the north, Northern Ireland, Northern England, the heart of Scotland, and that will allow temperatures to dip quite sharply. Touch of ground frost possible, I think, later on tonight, particularly in sheltered glens. And that cooling trend continuing over the next few nights, even a risk of air frost by Friday night. So changes afoot, and certainly a very big change tomorrow across southern areas. We lose the sunshine, a lot of cloud around, that cloud building, developing, some showery outbreaks developing, particularly across parts of Wales, and some sharp bursts of rain developing across some other southern parts of England as we go through the afternoon. Some showers further north as well, particularly for northeast England, parts of Scotland, the risk of thunder, maybe some sleet or snow up over the highest ground. Better chance of some late brightness for parts of northwest England, the Lancashire coast doing pretty well. And Northern Ireland, I think things will settle down quite nicely as we go towards the end of the afternoon. Temperature wise, it's going to feel cool, I think, in most places, around about the mid-teens generally, certainly a lot cooler than today. Across southern parts of England, 18 degrees for Lords, so I think a heat stroke is not going to be a problem, but bad light could well be later on in the afternoon as the shower clouds develop, and certainly an increasing risk of showers as we go towards Friday. So there will be some showers dotted around on Friday, particularly across England, some of those quite heavy and possibly thundery. There will be some sunshine in between, but look at those temperatures, certainly feeling quite cool, especially in the south with a bit of a breeze, no higher than 15 or 16 degrees. As we go into Saturday, I think we'll lose most of the showers, things starting to settle down. There'll be some spells of sunshine, especially the further south and west we go. Most of the rain really confined to the far north of Scotland. Bits of cloud floating around, but all in all, not too bad to start the weekend. Those temperatures very slowly recovering as high pressure starts to edge in from the west and settles down over us as we go towards Sunday. So plenty of fine weather again for the second half of the weekend. Some sunshine, some good long sunny spells, I fancy. Those temperatures only very, very slowly recovering up towards the high teens in most places. So we are seeing some changes, cooler than of late, yes. We'll see some showers for a time, and then as we head towards the weekend, the hope of some sunshine again. Good night.